further ado, I would like to introduce our wonderful, wonderful Elizabeth Stewart.
If you can narrow down, concept in setting a value is to narrow your market down as much as you can. So the more descriptives you can find about that work, right. Like in filmmaking, for example, right. It's a women's film. It deals with feminist issues. It has no male protagonist, and you narrow it down so your area of interest is smaller and smaller and smaller. Is the concept is in setting a value on your work is if you can narrow your target to the person that will most want it. Right. You have the great advantage of being able to ask almost what you want to ask. That's a little bit about. Now I want to address your question regards these. Regards how do you research your market? So what in this way you're saying, well, but I'm talking about old pieces versus how to set the work of a living artist. The research is the same. So what you would do is you'd say, within this genre, this classification of art, this is unsigned work. I'm using this as an example. Unsigned work of famous Scottish poets in a primitive style. It's in a miniature scale, et cetera, et cetera. And then what you do is you do a search, and I'm going to give you a couple of good websites that work for contemporary art, abstract art, and 18th and 19th century art. The first website that I like to use is called P, the letter P, 4A. P4, it's a numeral 4. So it's P4A.com. And I love them because you don't have to speak my language. They have little thumbnail vignettes of a lot of separate out fields. You know what I'm talking about. So they'll say, here's porcelain, and then there's X number of classifications of porcelain. But if you click on those, you'll see the little thumbnails, and you will be able to figure out the classification visually. So that's P4A, which is all visual thumbnail keys, and they do a wonderful broad search. For example, American School Contemporary Art, you can use that bottom end fraction and say, let's say your style is very 60s, very mid-century. You can say, let me see what artists sell for that paint in this style from 1960 to 1970. You can use that field to actually get a sense of your style, for example. And look at those little visual thumbnails, and you'll get a sense of who paints like you or who painted this in this style. Mm-hmm. And remember I said it's unsigned, so you would do school of, school of, style of, everybody knows those sorts of words. And you start to see whose work your work resembles. Now, when you're very judicious in your tell your friend judiciously choose. You're not looking for Rodinko. You're not looking for the great sculptures of the world. You're looking for people that are like his work, your sculpture's work, but that maybe aren't the $3, $4, $5 million range. Yeah. Okay. So I'm delicately trying to say you want to look for artists that fall within a certain category that is more closely aligned with school of. Mm-hmm. So if you can identify he sculpts in a certain style, you can plug in school of, and then start narrowing down all of these, the 8 points of similarity, and get fairly close to finding at least 5 works. At least 5 works that you feel, they have a lot of similarities in many different ways, these 5 works. Now what you're going to do is when I say 5, and this applies to researching old art too, why I say 5 is, when you price a work of art, you don't use an average. So for example, when Saul's pricing a beautiful work of his, he's not saying, let me take the last 5 pieces I've sold and do an average and average out those 5 pieces. What you're looking for when you price a work of art is called the modal value. The modal value is as follows. These are the things you don't learn when you're studying for an MFA, but the modal value is how the art market, and I take this from the IRS and I take this from insurance practices, so that it's the business of the art, which Julie asked me to speak about. I'm taking it from the other side, from the different side than the artist would necessarily look at. Modal value is if you've got 5 figures, 5 figures. Now you've narrowed that search down. Here's somebody paid $2,000 for this work. Here's somebody paid $2,000 for this work. Here's somebody paid $4,000. Here's somebody paid $2,000, and here's somebody that paid $5,000 for a like sculpture.
Right.
The modal value is 2.
Why?
It's the most often hit price.
Are you kidding me?
It's the most often hit price. Yes.
Wow.
That's how you determine. So it's not my rule. It's
No, I'm just.
yeah. It's insurance companies, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not the average of the price that you're looking for. It's the most often hit price for the same similar material, same size, same scale, same medium, same era, same feel, la. So you are now tailoring a funnel in which you are looking at the market, but you're looking at the market for similarities in a certain way, in a certain style, in a certain genre, a certain time period.
So, okay, sorry.
Please.
Okay, so, but then when you're talking about, is that in the last year? Is that in the last 5 years?
Right.
In the last 10 years?
So here's the determinant. You're looking for 5. If in the case of, you're researching for 5, and in the last 10 years you only see 5 that are similar, you use those 5. For example, I have been appraiser on record for a lot of fire damage in regards to art, and been in court with insurance companies and high-end statisticians that work for insurance companies, etc. So, Elizabeth, how do you come to this value for this work of art? It's the same thing that I was telling you. It's because if you've got, I'll give you a good example. If you've got a Picasso that's a litho, a Picasso woodcut, for example, and he only did in the series 15, and let's say 11 are in private and museum collections, so now you've got 4 out there in the market. You've got to expand your search 20 years to locate the sales of those 4.
Oh, gotcha.
So your question is, can you limit it to just the last 2 years or so? It has to do with the rarity of what you're looking for. And if your sculpture friend works in a very unique way, you might have to, remember that bottom figure is time.
Correct, yeah.
You might want to open up that field, that field of time. So does that ring true in any way, shape, or form with anybody here that's kind of done a search for how to look at the valuation of their art, Sal?
Not to be specific or anything, but so.
That's how long it takes to make a piece, and I don't know.
Takes a lifetime. Mm.
Well,
yeah.
I don't know, because I have so many different stages, and I found that just the editing stage, just that stage, I need a rest period. Sometimes it's months, sometimes it's weeks, sometimes it's years. Between, originally working with a camera and then many hundreds of pictures will go into, an idea or a thought. I have to select one, and then, or there's a long period of time, and then there's the period of time that I work on it sort of digitally, and then there's the period of time that I work on it physically, and then there's a lot of drying stages. And I've never been able to clock the time.
So that is a problem.
It's
And then there's your education, your background,
Right.
your
well, then
Sure.
there's the education, the MFA, and all the years I spent in my parents' studios and their art gallery, and
This is why the Artisan Model. Yeah, so that's the Artisan Model. That's the jobber model. That's the model that is working on the hourly rate basis. You can use that, and sometimes we design a platform where we're using that, but we're offsetting it against what the market has borne.
Right.
of similar pieces. And you can do a compare and contrast of both figures. But I'm a strong proponent of looking at work as similar to yours as you can possibly get in an objective way. And it's so hard for the artist to do. Yeah, which is usually why people will come to visit me and say, you know, what are the categories in which you are seeing the work? I mean, when Peter came to the office for Sal's work, he had a wonderful, is it Peter Frankel that came to the office? Yeah, he came to my office because Sal was out of town and he had these big canvases, and Peter Frank wanted to actually do a piece for, I think it was for Art Forum? Was it Art Forum? It's been years, but he did it. It's a major art magazine, and so it was great because Sal wasn't there. So Peter and I were able to say, it's like this, 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 it's like this. So we picked the 8 categories in which we, in our conceptual categorizing minds, he being a critic and me being an appraiser, we narrowed it down then to similar boxes, right?
That had been in the room.
Yeah. We had at least 3-4 hour conversation about the works that had been similar to Sal's work, and we changed the bottom end of fraction. We changed time. We changed some of the even scale, for example. And he came up with Peter at the time. I'll never forget it because at one point I think we were moving it because we think we were going to show it at Westmont. Weren't you going to be in a show, or was it a juried show or something? Peter was doing something at Westmont. He was doing a
the application.
So Peter was doing, he was guest curator, and he's an incredibly, marvelous, famous critic of the arts, visual arts. And so we were getting in the elevator because Peter was on his way. It was now 7:30 at night, I can remember this. And we looked at the elevator walls, and they were kind of the same size as Sal's triptych. And we were looking like, my God, these walls are talking now, because of the work we had just been looking at. So that's what I'm saying, is you get the poetic. Don't do the per hourly and before you do the poetic analysis of the work.
Right, and
do the
I
poet.
was just interested because this person does really, he's the artist, obviously, he's looking at it, it's like he's trying to assess.
You gotta have the artist out of the room.
That's what it,
It's hard to assess your own work.
Yes, you got to have the artist, because many times they're both equally astounded and sometimes insulted if I come up with, oh yes, this is very like X, and they're like, I always hated that artist. How could it be like X? As a matter of fact, there's just an aside, and then I want to move on to another topic. But there's Velasquez is a Brazilian artist who's here from New York, who's doing a one-woman show at the Santa Barbara Museum of Art. And I had seen her work for years, and I know Julie Joyce, who's the curator there, was working with her for 4 years to get her to show at the museum. And I had a conversation on my radio program with Julie and Velasquez, and I said, Valeska, your work is in my mind kind of a romantic minimalism. So you see, if you can put that label on it, if you know a good label maker, good label producer like myself or Peter, or a good critic of the art, or a good scholar of the arts, or a good person who's an expert in art history, professor of art history, for example, get those labels and write those labels down. And you can actually do a search in the critical analysis of your friend's work. But I said, you are a romantic minimalist to me. And she hit the roof. What do you mean? I'm a Baroque conceptualist. You see? There couldn't be 2 more different labels. But but then again, it was like, Julia's like, yeah, you're the artist. We're going to write about you. You're not writing about your work. She says, no, if I wanted to write about my work, I'd be a writer. I wouldn't be a visual artist, which is what, let us label it for you then. And many artists, I remember Russell Crowe, who was this marvelous artist, collected for 25 years in the Museum of Contemporary Art in San Diego. I remember meeting him and appraising one of his pieces for the museum to purchase many, many figures. And I said, so what's your track record? He at that point had sold many pieces. So I asked him, what's your track record? How are we getting to the value? So how am I going to communicate with the museum what the value is? And he pulls out an underwear drawer, and from the underwear drawer flies all these cocktail napkins where he's written down 200,000, 300,000, and just made a ledger for himself about what he had charged for various pieces. And I said, wow.
That was his ledger?
Uh-huh.
That's interesting, okay.
That was his ledger. And I said, wow, that works. At least, I was like, thank God, at least an artist wrote it down. It was like, thank you. At least, okay, I got through the red wine stains and the coffee stains and the underwear, but at least I've got a spreadsheet of such. So, this is the kind of thing where I'm saying if I wanted to be an accountant, I would have gone into accountancy. Artists don't necessarily have to be accountants.
So I guess I just have one more
Yeah.
question. You may have already answered it.
Yes.
I hope I'm not. So
Please.
when you're talking about someone who's just, so for example, the artist who's just starting out.
Uh-huh.
I mean, they may have like a body of work that they're wanting to sell versus someone who's sold. So when you're talking their work, so when you're talking about the pieces that you use for comparison,
Yes.
how does it work formulaically to look at?
Yes. Yes.
A newly fledgling artist
Yes.
versus someone who has established a track
Yes,
record?
yes. So usually you'll start off with that train of similarities. I will suggest that we look at things very similar to if you're an emerging artist,
right.
let's look at other artists that work like you, that are in the next stage of their career.
Right, but I mean, how, like, for example, I mean, we could use Saul again. I don't know, but how, like, if someone's already sold, say.
Yes. So
what's the
your
difference?
question, if I could maybe phrase it, is when does that supersede the track record?
Or how does that?
Yeah,
I mean,
so it's a combination of both, because one aspect speaks to trends.
Right.
That first analysis of similarities, that speaks to market trends, because the trends in the market are going to be reflective of the values paid.
Right, and
So
then
you should always be looking at that,
Right.
but you should always be keeping a ledger of your sales. And by the way, those artists in here that sell, one of the things that I really counsel you strongly to look into very closely is donating your work, because it is a little hidden problem in donating work. And many of our beautiful not-for-profits are always in the market for auctions or works to be donated to auction. It's very difficult to donate your work and not have me find out. So if you're an artist, for example, we use Saul, for example, I sell a piece 20,000, 30,000, 40,000, da-da-da, and then he donates it and someone at an auction pays 2,000.
Oh my God.
So I'm going to know that, and that is going to be reflective
That's
of
kind
the,
of value
yeah. And unless I know the artist personally and can call them, the sales figures come through to me from various searches that I will do when I'm doing a search for portfolio presentation, for example, for a museum, for example, or if we're wanting to insure the work, for example, for a major collector, and the collector wants to know what the projected net worth is, et cetera, et cetera. So donating can be a blessing in a disguise, because it can get you on the map as regards people understanding who you are and loving your work, but you'd be very careful not to go that one step farther and broadcast it too much. And the good news about Santa Barbara is there's the reporting services that the IRS requires when there's a non-cash charitable contribution, which is an 8283 non-cash charitable contribution for an artist who donates a work. You've got to fill out this 8283 form, and in many cases the supporting organization, the 8283 for example, doesn't have to confirm that value. They do by law, but in Santa Barbara there's so many not-for-profits the IRS can't keep up with it. So just be careful if you're going to donate in a major city that there is a way that an appraiser can find your track record regards to that one lovely donation. I'm not saying don't donate, but it can really bite you in the butt. you have to be careful.
This person was actually talking about that because he is talking about, having a piece displayed in a nonprofit. But someone is gonna purchase his piece and then donate it to them because they're on a board. I can't, and they can afford to buy the piece. And
Uh-huh.
and then they're donating it to the nonprofit. So in other words, someone's actually purchasing
That's a
this
little
piece.
different.
Yeah.
Well, I can really speak to that because
Okay.
yeah,
That was
that's something that I get hired to do, and my reaction is it's a minefield because
It sounded like it.
yeah, because so here he's an artist who doesn't have much of a track record,
Right.
who doesn't have a certain track of valuations, and someone's going to buy the work and then they're going to donate the work to a not-for-profit, right? And they're going to take the non-cash charitable donation. It is up to the person who's buying it and donating it to prove that they actually know the track record. And how you make that track record is you have at least three comparable sales to declare to the IRS. So this person who's buying the piece,
When you say three the artist has to have three.
no, the person who's claiming the work, claiming the donation.
Oh, okay.
So they're claiming because they're wanting a deduction against their gross.
Right.
So they can't say, oh, well, they can. You say, oh, yeah, we bought this piece, it was $300,000, and we're going to take $300,000 off our gross. The IRS is going to say, prove that this artist regularly sells for $300,000. Because fair market value, this is going off the subject, but I'll just give, with your permission, give her, fair market value is defined as the most common price paid in the most appropriate market. It's right there in the tax code, and boy, it's a big problem because then not only is the man who's donating the work liable for the difference between 0 and 300,000, but the artist is going to be questioned along the way. Show us your track record.
Wow.
So it's an issue that once you get the IRS a player in the world of fine art, you don't want to be there.
No, because I mean, it sounds like when you're talking about your parents or whatever, that this is maybe the fact that mom does know someone that can make one of those purchases.
And I'd be more than happy to talk to the artist and the man who's playing. Sal, you have word on this?
Oh, I have a question sort of about the whole donation
Yeah.
thing. So this happened to me earlier this year. It just came up because I was trying to ship a show out and 3 pieces were missing.
Yeah.
And 2 of them are just flat out missing. One of them I realized, I donated it to an organization that sold it at a benefit auction.
Yeah.
And it was for a good cause, but they never told me any details of the transaction. They didn't tell me the buyer or the amount. And finally I was like saying, can you tell me about this? And they said, well, we can tell you how much it sold for, but we can't tell you who bought it. And every other time I've ever donated artwork, they always give me not only the name, but the contact information. And they said, we can't tell you the name.
Someone famous maybe.
So, that was a surprise. That was one thing. And the other thing, it was a real bummer. This was a piece that, my regular retail price would be like $2,400, and they sold it for $850.
Right.
Oh my God.
Right. See, that's what I'm saying is there's a pitfall there for the practicing artist, and it sounds beautiful to do this, to donate their work. Now, as regards to declaring the value, first of all, Sal, you could really have a problem with them because by law they need to write the 8282 form saying this was the artist's work who donated this and we sold it for X, because they have to do it for their basis. They have to show, like Julie would have to show that this was a donation in kind and we used this much of it, and the rest of it, you have to make it has to balance for the not-for-profit, or you can lose your 501c3 status. Yes.
So
Yes, I
that's-
understand your
like,
question.
is
So
it-
it's two separate issues.
Right.
One is the pot saying, I would like to donate the work to a not-for-profit. What are the pitfalls? And I was discussing a little the pitfalls. The other question is, how do I price the work? And how you price the work for the market is kind of the same as you would price it for a donation as well. It's the most common price paid in the most appropriate market. And there you use those 8 characteristics of similarities. I do it every day. Every appraisal I do, I'm using the abstract of what the work is and setting it against similar things in the market. And you can do this, you can do it many ways, but how I'm suggesting to people that aren't artists is to do it with words, with similar words, abstract expressionism, romantic realism, get a sense of the wording. And I wanted to address Nance's question regarding the marketplace of 19th century art. So this is addressed in my book, which is called No Thanks, Mom. And what I'm talking about is the marketplace for 19th century anything is depressed. And the reason is the 19th century tended to be an era where heavy and big and curvilinear shapes were very important. Likewise, the heaviness of the frame. The color scheme was usually fairly dark. It's quite involved. The works of art from the 19th century are generally quite involved. So they're carved, or they're dark, or they're heavy, or they're ornate, etc. That is the absolute antithesis of where the market is today. Where the market today is geometric, angular, mid-century, very clean, very light, very portable. So the kind of things that we're seeing that are selling huge, great value are the kind of things that you would associate, for example, with light-filled lucite, glass and steel, and lightweight, wonderful Eames, for example, Sarian. These are names of famous mid-century designers that designed in shapes that are very streamlined, total opposite of the intricacies of the 19th century. So right now, there's really very little market for 19th century art or antiques unless they are named. And what I mean by named is if this was signed and we could actually research the artist, we weren't working on genre, we were working on actual physical artists, the artist's name always supersedes the work. Always. And so if you were to say to me, for example, Diane, who is I can tell her mind works in if then this, if then this. And so, yeah.
Oops.
No, which is, but what I would say is that, if you have a work like this that's unsigned as opposed to a signed piece, the signed piece will always be worth much more regards because you can research the artist. So artist signature trumps style. And the worst style to sell right now is the 19th century because it is, how the market goes? It goes organic, linear, dark, light, classic, it goes classic, organic, it goes in waves. And those waves are like sine waves. They get closer together or farther apart as the market changes. But the antithesis of the 19th century style is where the market is today, which is modern and geometric and clean. And so unless you found the Scottish Literary Society in New York City and donated these to those people, that's the highest and best market. You see?
The Scottish Society in Santa Barbara?
Right.
But my daughter just informed me yesterday she wants them.
Okay, then you're good. Then you have no issue with no thanks, Mom. You're like, great.
So you're being a generous mom.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the 19th century, and then the concept also of Ken's questions about nursing homes and his paintings of how to set value. When you have a whole estate, My suggestion, Ken, work counterintuitively to how you would normally work on divesting. What I mean by that is, don't start with the little stuff. Don't start with, let me get rid of mom's pots and pans and china and kind of natty looking rugs, and don't start with that. Start with the very best she has. Start with the great paintings where you can identify they were in the Spalding collection, here's the artist's name, and then once you get the artist's name, plug that into P4A, or plug that into artprice.com, which is another great resource that I use. Artprice is harder to use because you have to speak a couple of languages. It's written in German and French and English, which is okay. That's, for me, it's fine. But they're not as visually, there's not as many visuals as P4A. But Artprice, if you know the artist's name, you're going to get a huge amount of track record of international auction sales. You will not get gallery sales for those top-end painters. Why? Because galleries do not have to declare what they sold things for. The only folks that have to declare are the publicly traded things like auctions. And that's a whole other conversation. Maybe Julie will have me come back about how a emerging or mid-career level artist can take advantage of the auction market, which is really a super thing, and very few artists, those artists here, should know more. I know. We have to have coffee, so I will tell you about that. Well, thank you very much for your patience and time.